All right, let's begin tonight in Washington with the push to get the job market back on track. President Biden delivered remarks today at a meeting of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. He touched on some points we have been hearing through the week: job growth, unemployment, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and Build Back Better. Now, the president just wrapped up his first year in office, and our latest NBC News poll indicates that 6 out of 10 Americans say they disapprove of the job he is doing on the economy. Now, we're entering year 2 of this pandemic. I know it feels like it's a lot longer than that. And there's no doubt that the economy has suffered. According to the latest jobs report, the economy added almost 200,000 jobs in December. But that's a lot lower than the 400,000 jobs that were predicted. Unemployment dropped to a low of 3.9%. But nearly 4.5 million people resigned from their jobs just in November. So how does the administration plan to tackle a faltering economy and an uncertain labor force? Well, the U.S. Secretary of Labor has some ideas. He also spoke at the Conference of Mayors, laying out a new jobs initiative.
The Good Jobs Initiative is led by the Department of Labor to make sure that we deliver on everything that we say and do. Working people across America are looking for better opportunities. They're fighting for their American dream. That's what the labor dynamic shows. In this historic recovery and with this president's leadership, we can work together to provide those opportunities.
And he joins us now to discuss it. Secretary Marty Walsh, welcome to the program. Glad to have you with us.
Thanks for having me tonight. It's an honor to be on with you.
Let's get to some of what's in this Good Jobs Initiative. We've got a list of bullet points of some of the big highlights, some of the headlines from the initiative, and they range through a number of different things, including building job quality across federal agencies, engaging employers to improve job quality, certainly making sure that some of the infrastructure jobs in the bipartisan infrastructure plan can be filled properly. There's some work to improve to access to unionization around the country. Are there one or two pieces of this initiative, Secretary, that you think are at the top of the priority list? I know they're all important, but are there one or two that are at the very top?
Well, I think job training is one of those things that's really important in working with employers and employees. I think that in the past, we might have tried to solve the problem by talking to one side and really having employers at the table to talk about what are the skills that people need to access the jobs that they have available, and talking to the employees, knowing that how they can access to get their rights moving forward. So those are two of the probably the areas I would jump out right now. The Good Job Initiative really is kind of a one-stop shop. Historically, what we've tried to do in the federal government and in local and state governments all across America is work on certain aspects, whether it's better job quality, better child care, stronger child care, better wages. And everyone has different initiatives. And this kind of puts it all under one roof as we move forward here, as we think about the infrastructure law that was signed by the president that'll be going across America with new roads and bridges and broadband, and also helping strengthen our economy.
And thank you. Forgive me. I think I referred to it as the infrastructure bill before. It is the infrastructure law, and it is being implemented. I wonder what you mean by job quality, particularly with that figure we showed about resignations from jobs. That the latest summary from today for October to November showed that quit rates or resignation rates increased in 22 states, held steady, or decreased in only 2 states. And we mentioned that 4.5 million people resigned in November. What do you think is going on? Is it a particular aspect of job quality, Secretary Walsh, that's driving some people to just quit?
There's no question about it. I mean, a lot of it comes down to job quality. A lot of it comes down to people who have to work 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet, and they don't want to do that anymore. A lot of it has to do with still living in a pandemic, within a pandemic, a once-in-a-century pandemic. And as we continue to go through this, President Biden laid out a strong economic plan. I would say our economy is strong. I would describe it as that, with 6.5 million new jobs being created, unemployment rate 3.9%, setting historic records moving forward. I would also say that we have more work to do. And I think that when I talked today to the mayors, I was talking about the Good Jobs policy and making sure that they're working with us. Every mayor you talk to, they're going to talk about the jobs that are open. The employers that are talking to them are talking to us. The concerns that they have, we all have. And we there's no question about it. We have more work to do. And the president has stayed steady. I mean, I know that his approval rating in the poll that you showed a second ago we'd like to flip that around. but we got to stay the course. We can't change. This isn't about trying to get higher approval ratings and be popular. This is about returning America on track. The last administration didn't have a plan for the beginning of the coronavirus. They didn't have a plan to get people vaccinated. They didn't have a plan to lay out for economic opportunities. They didn't have a plan how we're going to come back. So President Biden has laid that plan out.
Talk about what you mean by job quality. When you say job quality, define that term for me.
Job quality can mean anything from the job you have with the skill that you have, or the wages that you're earning, or the benefits that are there. I don't want to pick on any particular job, but some folks are working in low wage jobs and they feel like they should be working in better wage jobs. And part of that is by working with us now at the Department of Labor in the investments that we're making in job training. And I think it's so key to work with companies as well, to ask what are the talents that they're looking for? What are the skills they're looking for? Historically, in the past, when you do job training, there's lots of programs around this country that are training people into jobs. What we want to do is actually partner them with the jobs. A great example of that is with the supply chain. We sat down with trucking companies. We saw that there was a shortage of truck drivers in our country. We realized that we need to do something drastic. We brought them to the table at the White House. Myself, Secretary Buttigieg, Brian Dees, at the direction of the president. We came up with an apprentice program that within two days, companies would be able to start working on creating apprenticeship programs within their own companies. We're working on alleviating some of the problems of CDLs and getting trained. We have, in the first week, we had 50 companies sign up to say we want to create a pre-apprentice program within our industry. Truck driving jobs at one point in our country were looked at and revered as good, strong middle-class jobs. They're not today. So we're changing that outlook for trucking jobs, and we can do it with any industry in America as we move forward here.
One of the things that's included in this initiative has to do with unionization, and the latest polling shows that Americans generally support unions. A Gallup poll from this past September showed that 2/3 of Americans say that they approve of unions. You see a lot more private companies, or a few more private companies anyway, like Starbucks, that are seeing some unionization efforts, including in Starbucks locations in Buffalo, New York. Secretary Walsh, you're the former mayor of Boston. Boston is a very strong union town, so I don't have to ask you what your view is of unions, but I think some businesses who are going to be confronted with a unionization drive are going to panic. And the first thing they're going to think is, why didn't they just come to me and ask for more money and more time off? I would have just given it to them rather than have to deal with this. There's this kind of knee-jerk that happens when unionization comes up. How does the administration help both workers and businesses when unionization is on the table?
Yeah. Well, certainly, the president has been very clear that he supports collective bargaining, he supports union organizing, and he supports people's right to join a union. He's made it very, very clear without interference. He has said that many, many times at speeches and from everywhere, quite honestly. I think what we're seeing in this country, we're seeing a collective group of people standing up and saying, we're not happy with where we are. We're not happy with the revenue we're having. We're seeing companies in this country that have increased their minimum wage for their own company to $15 to $18 an hour at a starting salary all across America. Big companies, small companies, sandwich shops, chain stores. We're seeing that. And I think that there is a movement right now by people in America that are saying, wait a second, why should big business benefit and not have us benefit here that is making the money and working in these places? So I think that that's also what's happening here. And I guess my definition or my advice to companies in America is don't be afraid of unions, because I think unions, as we move forward here too, we're going to see unions are changing. Just like society's changing, business is changing, unions are changing as well, and you can be a partner with unions. I'm not sure if every job in America is going to be organized in a union, which probably won't be the case. But I think we're going to see more organizing in our country, and it all goes back to working conditions, wages, benefits, maybe paid leave, sick time, things like that. That workers are saying, wait a second, I'm tired of working 3 jobs, not making enough money to make ends meet. And I just want to work one job, and by having the ability to collective bargaining in my corner is going to help me.
A few more quick questions before I got to let you go. Right. A few more quick questions before I got to let you go. The president at his news conference this week talked about breaking up the Build Back Better agenda into chunks rather than trying to get it passed in one big block. Any of those particular pieces that the Labor Department is going to be especially involved in going forward?
Well, certainly as I travel around the country, I hear from people all the time. And the biggest issues I hear about, for the most part, are childcare, the cost of childcare, and the accessibility to childcare. I talk to childcare providers talking about the ability for them not be able to keep people because of the poor wages they have to pay, because that industry does not have the revenue or the investment in it that it quite honestly needs. We saw millions of women leave the workforce during this pandemic. I think it was 1.6 million women completely left the workforce with childcare age children under the age of 6. I mean, the reasons for that is quite honestly not good, strong childcare. So I think childcare is one of those areas. The cares economy as a whole. I think also, looking at, potentially some environmental investments that we're going to make as we continue to be less dependent on fossil fuels as we continue to move forward renewable energy. And quite honestly, selfishly, I'm going to throw it in here because I hope the president's listening. Is job training. I mean, as we think about 4.5 million people who have left the workforce or left their job for whatever reason it is, those folks need to get back to work at some point. They want to get back to work in better paying jobs and stronger jobs. And the way we do that is by having real good, strong job training in our country. We have money at the Department of Labor right now that's allocated through Congress and through the president. But if we want to really scale that program up, we need more revenue to be able to do that, to invest. It's not even revenue, it's investment in the American worker.
Last few seconds, since you brought up job training, any particular sectors or industries that you would like the president to advocate more funding for job training for before we go?
No, I think it changes. It's not necessarily what the president or what I want. It's really what the regions want. And today, talking to mayors, different mayors have different industry in their communities, whether it's manufacturing. I think manufacturing, obviously, in our country, the president's made a real big effort to bring more manufacturing to our country. We're seeing some supply chain issues because when manufacturing's happened in other countries, quite honestly, the coronavirus, the pandemic has impacted that. We want to be more dependent on American manufacturing. I think that's one area, and I think we have to look into the future a little bit in our medical systems and nursing and mental health services, things like that, and also just really it's going to be regional, what the needs are in different regions.
I would love to talk to you in the future about the healthcare workforce. Obviously, COVID has taken a huge toll on our healthcare workers, and there's clearly a lot of work to be done there, but that's a conversation for another night. But for now, Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, I really appreciate you making time for us, sir. Thank you very much.